They're coming to get you, Barbara.
Stop it, Johnny, stop!
A night with the dead who cannot die. A night of total terror. Night of the living dead.
Everyday Aficionados here. I'm Sean.
Miguel?
And we have another movie review for you today. And we are taking a look at, of course, Night of the Living Dead from 1968. It is that classic zombie horror flick directed by George A. Romero. Let's just get into this one.
Okay, so first off, I think it has to be said that the aesthetics of this movie are absolutely brilliant. This movie was, as you said, made in 1968. That's the late 60s, so, most of the new movies coming out in that time were in color. For this movie to be in black and white, it really does make it stand out from the rest of its peers in terms of the films that were coming out at the time. I mean, Planet of the Apes came out in the same year. 2001 came out in the same year. This movie straddles sort of two different aesthetic styles and time periods, and it comes together in a really interesting way. You've got sort of the 1950s B science fiction horror movies on one side, and then you've got this sort of new wave of psychedelic 60s imagery on the other side. And this movie combines both of them and ends up with a really unique visual style. You've got all these off-kilter, low-angle shots of characters, extreme close-ups, really weird sound effects in specific moments. And it all combines to create this sense of claustrophobia, unease, and the movie even feels surreal at moments, especially when we see Barbra going through her sort of mental breakdown in the beginning.
Yeah, to me this movie looks really great. It sounds really great too. I think the music is definitely effective and it really accentuates the scenes pretty nicely. I think the makeup on the zombies is really effective. It's not too fancy, but it suffices. And you can definitely tell that this is sort of like a lower budget independent movie, and I really like that look. I really love it. To me, the characters were a bit of a mixed bag. You had some really strong characters like Ben and Cooper. To me, their conflict was like what this movie was all about. Like, that's the center of this movie. Barbra, to me, was one of the weaker characters. Of course, she has that breakdown and she's sort of the weak woman of the group. I didn't really like Tom, which was the husband of the happily married couple. He sort of had this weird, Scooby-Doo member vibe to him, gee willikers, guys, can't we just work together? But like I said, Ben and Cooper, their conflict, very strong. Cooper's like that weaselly guy that you just love to hate, and Ben is the strong protagonist, one of the first African-American protagonists in a movie. He's just a great character. So, like I said, it's a mixed bag of characters for me in this movie.
Yeah, and you mentioned Ben being one of the first strong African-American protagonists in a film. And that really points to the fact that this film is doing something a little bit deeper than your classic science fiction fare. This film is really poking at different elements of American culture, different political conflicts happening at the time, and forcing all of these different people into this compromising situation, sort of to create a pressure cooker of differences to show just how they break down under stress.
To me, this movie was all about the social interactions between these characters. They're all stuck in this house together, and it's fun and interesting to see them interact with each other. To be honest, the zombies kind of play second hand to these characters' interactions. It's almost like the zombies are just an excuse for these characters to be stuck together and to be forced to work together and survive together.
Exactly. And really, all the successful zombie movies or zombie stories I can think of really do follow that formula. And it's interesting to see how literally the first flesh-eating zombie movie used really the only successful zombie formula. It kind of shows how smart and innovative the movie was for its time.
Yes, and how influential it was that every zombie movie that came after this one tried to replicate that format in some way or form. Another positive thing about this movie for me is the pacing. It starts off really fast and sort of grabs you and pulls you right into it, and you're really on the edge of your seat in that beginning. And then it sort of slows down a little bit and gives you time to breathe and build tension and sort of let the mystery of what's going on linger a little bit longer. I love how this movie starts off and it doesn't even explain anything to you, though. It just immediately they're being attacked and you're in survival mode. And then it's like that for the rest of the movie.
Yeah, and then when it finally does cut in with some exposition, it's very natural and organic, you know? News broadcasts, radio broadcasts, television broadcasts. It's all done through these indirect means, and we as the viewers kind of have to parse that information and try to figure out what's right, what's wrong, what might just be hearsay. And we're right there with the people in the house. We know just as little about this as they do. So it's a great technique of keeping us in tune with the mindset of these characters and understanding why they're reacting to things the way they are and how they're processing their situation.
Another thing that was really ahead of its time in this movie was the violence. Now, it's not overly violent, especially to today's standards. It doesn't show everything, and that makes you fill in the blanks in your head, and it makes certain scenes seem more violent than they really are, and it's really effective. And it's not a coincidence that the American rating system came out a few months after this movie was released.
So you mentioned characters, and that's one of my favorite parts about this movie as well. You talked about how Mr. Cooper is sort of this person who you love to hate, but to me, he's a very compelling character because he's a little weaselly, but he's not entirely reprehensible. He just wants him and his wife and his daughter to survive, and he's not a man who has a lot of courage or a lot of strength. He just seems like a desperate man, which to me is a lot more compelling than just a regular villain or a backstabber, what have you.
And of course he ends up being right all along too about staying in the basement. So even though he sort of goes about it the wrong way, trying to get people to go into the basement, that was the right decision to make. Also, I really like seeing the interaction between Cooper and his wife. There's so much awkward tension between the two of them. And just the way that they interact with each other, you get a sense that there's all this hatred and history among them that doesn't even need backstory because of how well it's portrayed.
Yeah, just their first interaction. You get such a good sense of exactly where they are with each other. That they're just sort of tolerating each other because they have to. You know, maybe they didn't even mean to get married or whatever, you know, but it just happened and they are obviously a terrible fit for each other. But you're right, you get this sense of history that comes through their interactions. And that sort of realism that the movie has is just really refreshing. Although it's, you know, science fiction, although it plays off of a lot of old tropes, it does feel like a movie that is grounded in realism. Ben, even our protagonist, he is not a perfect man. He is not the best guy in the world. He goes off the handle sometimes. He does things that are very morally questionable. There's no one who you can really depend on to be the voice of reason. There's no one who you can depend on to do the right thing. Everyone's just sort of in a frenzy.
And then, of course, you have the ending. Like I said, I don't want to spoil it, but it is a ballsy ending and a memorable one. And it's one that not many directors or writers would put into a movie. The fun story about this one is that George A. Romero was actually offered to have his movie taken up by a studio. And they said that they would do it as long as he changed the ending and added a love story subplot. And he said no.
Which is really admirable and led to his movie feeling thematically sound. especially these days, we've got more and more corporate influence on the media that we see, and it really shows that this movie, made in the 60s, it feels more honest and true to its subject matter than most movies today.
As a whole, I have to give this film a 5 out of 5. It's not only one of my favorite horror films, it's one of my favorite movies. It is the zombie flick to me, better than all the rest. I love the social and political aspects of it. This is one of those films that has a huge place in film history and has influenced so many movies after it. It's a classic movie, and it's definitely one that everyone should check out.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's a 5 out of 5 for me as well.
They're coming to get you, Barbra.
It feels like an independent movie, but it also feels like a traditional classic genre film. It's old-fashioned, yet it has these new aesthetic influences. It manages so many different things so well. I watch this movie and I feel satisfied. I feel affected. It feels like it had an artistic direction, a thematic impulse that was carried through all the way because of the passion of its creators.
It's one of the best horror movies of all time. It's one of the best independent movies of all time. What do you guys think of this movie? Have you seen it? Do you like it? Is it one of your favorite zombie films? Do you think it's the best zombie film? Let us know in the comments below.
And remember, whether it's liqueurs, movies, games, or beer,
if you're looking for reviews, you can find them right here.
Everyday Aficionados. See you next time.